Okay, I think we start. Masach al-khair, good evening, guten Abend. I would like to welcome you on behalf of Goethe Institute. I'm the director of the Institute in Lebanon. My name is Konrad Zille. And welcome you to this fifth ArtEvolution Impulse session, discussion, conversation space for reflection. ArtEvolution is a program that has been running now for almost a year. It's a way to support the creation of performing arts in Lebanon through different parts of the program. We supported 8 artists very intensively through a stipend, through a research and networking trip to Germany, through an intensive residency at Hamana Artist House. This all already happened. And actually this weekend, on Saturday and Sunday, these 8 artists will present their work in progress at Mansion in Beirut. So ArtEvolution comes to sort of like, for this year, the activities come to a closing this weekend, and I would like to invite you all to join on Saturday and Sunday. It starts at 4 p.m. each day, and then it runs until whenever we fall asleep, but it's going to be late, I guess, but I hope to see you there. And also part of ArtEvolution are these Impulse series that try to reach out to a broader audience and that have been curated by Marinur Hishaime, who is not moderating today, but Raya Badran is moderating today. Tonight we will talk about carving spaces of digital resistance, and I think we will hear more about the panelists, about our guests tonight, so I would like to welcome you all. I'm very much looking forward to an, I guess, interesting evening, and I hand over the word to Raya. Thank you. I don't know. This is your mic.
Hello? Yeah? Okay. Hi. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, everyone, and thank you for the Goethe Institute, Konrad, Marinur, for setting up this panel. I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists today, or it's, I mean, it's hard to call it a panel when it's just 3 of us, I guess, especially when I'm also, you know, part of one of the radios we'll be talking about today. But I'm hoping that this will make up for a very interesting conversation. So first, I'm going to introduce Jinan Darir. Shaya, sorry, Jinan Shaya, who is co-curator, who is co-founder and curator of Radio Ma'azif. Reem Shadid, who is a researcher and curator from Palestine and is also a resident DJ or resident host on Radio Al-Hara. So I'm not really going to be going into the details myself because I'd like to also start by asking the both of you, since you both occupy different roles in the respective radios that you've that were started during the pandemic, about what kind of role do you occupy at the radio, and how you basically came about to hosting the show, for instance, Reem.
Hi everyone. So I have a show on Radio Al-Hara. It's called Listening with Reem Shadid. It's called Listening with Reem Shadid. I actually also have a show on Ma'azif now. It's a new show. But I've been involved with Radio Al-Hara since they launched in March 2020. So right at the beginning of the pandemic. And actually they're friends, the founders are friends, so they just contacted me and they said, we're doing this and we want to involve as many, of our friends and collaborators and like new friends and collaborators as possible. And they asked me what I would like to do on the radio, which is something that I would have never ever thought of, that I would, like at that stage, I mean, I would listen to the radio every morning, but at that stage, radio was not really part of, part of where I kind of did work or thought with people or shared questions. Should I tell you what the show is or not yet?
Please.
Okay.
It's called also, sorry for not mentioning the title, it's called Listening with Reem Shadid.
So I started it. I mean, when they called me, maybe it's important to say, and I think maybe a lot of us were having this. There was like a lot of visual pollution for me, at least. And when they called me, I was really thinking of how do we. I'm predominantly kind of a visual art curator. I've worked with sound artists before, and but I mostly operate in art spaces and in art institutions. So when the pandemic first hit and when they started the radio, I really thought it was random that they would ask me. I mean, I was like, okay, I'm their friend. Maybe it's a courtesy question. But then I thought about it seriously, and I was thinking of the visual pollution that we had at the time, at least for me on my screen being stuck in a space. And I was also thinking of the work that we do, of where does it live now, how does it live? And I was also trying to think of how to not just take things online, which I know a lot of institutions in the beginning, till now we have to do it, but at the beginning there were all these kind of like visual exhibition, like online exhibitions and stuff, and I actually found it very difficult. I tried to see one online and I found it very difficult. So I was trying to think of like the medium of right now that we cannot physically visit spaces. How do we continue to do what we do? So I thought of obviously sound, because it's also radio. And then I was also thinking of sound in general and sound artists in general, and thinking of how I've always had questions of how they existed within gallery spaces also, because it was always in a very kind of specific constellation. I mean, of course, there are examples that were not. So I was also thinking of like what could a medium that works with, so the radio, that works with the medium of sound do, or what could it have the potential to do in changing our engagement with sound. So these were kind of like the things that I was thinking about, and then and then the last thing is that I was thinking, this is something that you and I talked about on the show when I hosted you, is how do we listen at a time like this? So how do we listen to silence? How do we listen to what's going on? It was also a time when I know I've spoke with a lot of people in a lot of cities at least who were saying, oh, we can hear the birds, or we can hear, here you can hear a lot of things, motor and helicopter and all of that stuff, but that you could really listen, like you could really, people started listening in a different way, or this is a conversation that you and I also had. So I was also thinking of how do we listen right now, and also things around kind of like the politics of listening and what does it mean, and all of that. So I thought of doing listening sessions with artists. It's very, it's very basic and direct, to be honest. It was, it just kind of led there. So the show, I host an artist. It's a monthly show. It used to be a weekly show. I host an artist who works at the intersection of sonic, visual, and kind of like literary production. And we kind of do a listening session. So we have a conversation, and then we listen to something, and then we kind of talk about it. And it's been different projects. So it's been kind of artistic projects that work with sound. They've been kind of discussions around some of these issues. So how do we listen, or this issue kind of a playback that you and I talked about. It was also kind of visiting earlier works. So the first episode was with Hassan Khan, and he wanted to kind of like look back at something he did in 1993, a jam session that he did with a friend who had passed away in 1993, which was also really amazing because it could help have a conversation around what was happening in Egypt, for example, at the time in terms of like jamming and improv music and DIY things that he told me about. Like, I can't remember now what they're called, technical things. But now it's a monthly show because it's a lot of work to do a weekly show. But I think Janan knows, and you know. So now it's a monthly show, and it's listening sessions.
Yeah, I can imagine that, the time that was provided to us during the pandemic, becomes kind of like receded as time went by. But I also think you touched on something that's quite important in that there's the space that radio opens actually kind of yields different conversations, especially regarding artists who are able to, or are able because of the medium itself to kind of talk about works that for one reason or another couldn't play or broadcast or work through in a different context. And I'm sure that we'll also touch on this particular subject later on. Jinan, you have a very different role in Ma'azif. You are the co-founder of Ma'azif, and so just for those of you who probably don't know, so Radio Al-Hara started maybe a week into the global lockdown, so in March, and it was hosted. Yeah, it was hosted by a website called Yamakan that was started by Shahab. I'm not sure what his surname is. I'm very sorry.
It was in Italy, no, where it started.
No, so they were inspired by a radio that was also started during the pandemic called Radio Quartiere, so the neighborhood radio. And so there was a surge in online radios. One of them was also started in Mansion, from Mansion here in Beirut. Radio Al-Hara came later on, but not actually, when you think about it, it's really not much later on, but actually the end of the month of March. Ma'azif, on the other hand, Ma'azif Radio was launched in May. And so my first question to you is, so since all of these radios basically were started because of the pandemic, because of this lockdown, did Ma'azif already plan to open a radio prior to that, or was it also something that was kind of like triggered by the pandemic?
Hey everyone. so yes, Ma'azif launched, like you said, in May. But initially, we were working on opening the radio like late to 2019, and we started working on the radio officially in January 2020. It took a lot of time for us to launch, but honestly, I really I'm grateful for the pandemic because it actually gave us a lot of time to sit at home and work on the project of the radio. So yes. But initially, Radio Ma'azif wasn't something that was conceived during the pandemic or for the pandemic or for reaching people who are necessarily sitting at home. It was made just because we wanted to create a radio in this area, and yeah, I mean, yeah. For many reasons, basically, we want collaborators from the region. We want people to get together. We want we want people to know who are the collaborators here. So yeah.
So you saw it as a sort of a natural continuation of the work that Ma'azif was already doing, and kind of showcasing music from the region, discussing it, critiquing it also, right? Yeah. So was the radio also? So actually, this kind of maybe also something worth talking about, maybe from the Ma'azif perspective is how you've also decided to curate this radio. Like what did you imagine it to be, aside from also just kind of like showcasing or commissioning musicians or DJs or producers to play music?
Yeah. So the idea is there's a lot of distance between our countries in the Arab world. I think it starts from this idea, the fact that you have to pay so much money to go to a neighboring country where you can go. It's a 3-hour car ride. So the idea is that there's so much distance between us and we don't really know each other. There's a lot of niche scenes in every country. And there's not enough collaboration, we feel, between each other. There's not a lot of knowledge of the presence of the other in other countries. So the idea of the radio was to actually create a community where, okay, there are hosts from, let's say, Beirut, hosts from Palestine, residents from, I don't know, Egypt, where we actually all know each other and actually are all operating under one platform. So yeah, this is the idea of the radio. Your question was,
well, I mean, what did you initially have in mind? Did you have in mind like so was it strictly music, for instance, or can listeners also listen to to a host who has more of a discursive show, or just really kind of like give us a sense of what the content is like, or how you came, how you've also kind of organized it in the way that you have.
Yeah. So it's both. It's anything. It's basically giving space for anyone who wants to use audio to communicate through music, if you're a DJ, you want to promote yourself, if you have an album you want to talk about, it's really just audio space. And that could take many forms. We have many talk shows. One of them is Reams, and a lot of artists who just want to showcase their music or their take on music or their specific, ideas around that, or have conversation with other artists around, a specific album or something. Basically, Ma'azif is a magazine initially, and it's a bunch of, audio music nerds. And we looked into each country and saw looked into seeing in each country who is active and who would like to be part of the radio, So we handpicked initially who would like to contribute, and we contacted them, and now they're all monthly residents on the radio. So yeah.
Maybe I'll say something, because I think I was also trying. I was part of another kind of panel a couple of months ago of how to listen to solidarity, particularly, but I was thinking really about the function. The role that these web radios, particularly, have played in bringing all these voices together. And I was thinking, this might be a huge statement, but I felt that for the first time that people from our region who live in all across the world, who are interested, of course, in kind of like, let's say, music or sound or art and culture also generally, that they had somewhere online that they could, for example, the chat element in both, I think also, that I think played a big role. But there was no physical space that could hold everyone. And I felt, at least with Radio Al Hara, I know, because in the beginning, I know now they have to be a bit more selective, but in the beginning there was really a form, and you fill a form and you get on the radio basically, and there was like no filtering almost. They later had to do it, but I think that this openness of form that both Ma'azif and Radio Al Hara have contributed massively to making this kind of like really a digital space that people feel ownership of, which a lot of times, sometimes I think there's difficulty of if there's a building or if there is. So anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, absolutely. I think part of the excitement, everyone's excitement around these radios, whether it was in the beginning or now, is really the result of having these spaces that can cross borders, or the hard borders that we have in the region. But it also allowed, I think, because I've been an avid listener, and I also ended up having my own show on Radio Al Hara, is that there was a sense of connectedness that, as Reem was saying earlier, that was really unprecedented, I feel. It also allowed us to meet each other when we otherwise would not have met, I think, because of the ways in which these kind of circles also are created or are kind of regimented, yeah. So it's kind of like a crossover between different disciplines as well. I feel like it's become a host for virtually everything, right? So if you wanted to talk about architecture, if you wanted to talk about politics or anything related or that falls under the kind of cultural field or cultural sector, is the radio space can hold that space for a meeting. And I think I think there's something that's very central around thinking around Radio Al Hara in particular, because I know it a little bit better. and this is what Yazan Al-Khalili, who is one of the co-founders of Radio Al-Haras, continually says, is that, you know, Radio Al-Hara is a communal space. So, you know, the audience is the radio, because, you know, it's both, the audience is both the producer of the radio and the listener of the radio. And I think this is incredibly interesting, and it's interesting how far it's come, yeah? Because, you know, the pandemic eventually subsided, in a sense that, you know, people went out of their homes, and were less tethered to their laptops and to the screens or to any of the devices, but it persists, it continues to be a very important space for everyone.
It's also a very intimate space, if you want to add to that. Mm-hmm. I mean, radios, like you said, the artist is the collaborator and the audience is the sort of listener, but I mean, someone is sending you something through his... You're producing something from your room into and it's reaching someone else in his intimate space. So I really feel like there's a very intimate I don't know, layer to radio, where it goes from a very intimate space to an intimate space, and you can reach your audience in their, I mean, in their setting, in their home setting, in the morning. I mean, this is what's also very attractive, I feel, about radio, that you don't need to go anywhere to listen to something or to discover someone or to get in touch with the space or with the community. You can do it from your own space and yeah, discover and you know, like, take your time and listen.
Yeah, I also have to agree with Riem about the importance of the chat room in both of the radios. I think that, you know, this was a particularly lively space also for you to kind of comment, give feedback, also receive feedback. It became really central to the experience of listening to the radio. And you know, since this is not a traditional radio, right? It's a web-based radio. So you know, there's really kind of space for immediate reactions, immediate connectedness that, you know, would be lacking, I think, in any other traditional media. So I also wanted to kind of talk about, well, the press has been all over the radios, right? I mean, all over the radios that kind of spurred from the pandemic. And a lot of them have also kind of written about the fact that, you know, a lot of these sites became sites of protest, spaces of protest, especially with the recent assault in Palestine, right? So the recent events in Palestine in May. And these two spaces became really also focal points for expressions of solidarity and expressions of resistance, right? And I think the two of them really kind of complemented each other. Radio Al-Hara was really kind of remained, you know, the host, yeah, in a sense that, you know, they also received so many different programs that were curated in so many different countries, like Mexico, as far as Mexico and Brazil, and, you know, so many different people kind of gave their time and energy to host or to curate musicians who wanted to express solidarity. And then also what was really interesting with Radio Ma'azif is that Radio Ma'azif started broadcasting live from Palestine during the events. And I mean, first maybe I'd like maybe to hear from you, Jinan, on how, first of all, how did it happen? How did these decisions get made, and the urgency of it all? And yeah, maybe a few words on that.
Definitely. So when the events were happening in Palestine, we felt very concerned that we have space. We have a voice that we could give. So we decided to, stop our programming and look for people who are protesting, look for people who are actually facing issues, and give them audio, like we would actually get their live feed and put it on the radio. We also showcased a lot of documentaries talking about the cause, We just stopped completely our programming in terms of music and put things that have to do with awareness towards Palestine and what's going on, and giving as many people voices to raise awareness and to talk and to I don't know, spread the light and spread I don't know, you know, support with what was going on. Yeah, basically that's what we did. And for the 2 weeks, I remember the 2 heavy weeks that was happening. I almost felt like we were a newsroom. We were like constantly looking for people on the ground, finding people to talk to, looking for video bits that we can replay for all the listeners to know and to be aware about the cause. So it was really like taking the programming and our airtime and our space online to raising awareness and educating people through the documentaries and through any audio snippet we had. So it was very heavy in terms of that. But yeah, it also reminded me of what happened during the explosion in Beirut. It was a few months after we launched, but also during that time, you know, you're behind the radio and you feel you have a microphone that you can give, and you want to spread the news, you want people to know what happened, you want to raise awareness, you want to talk about it, you want to, I don't know, people to know and people to understand what this side of the world is going through, you know, whether it's in Arabic or in English or any language. So yeah, that was what we did.
Yeah, I mean, it's what's interesting is that the radio almost reverted to its kind of a traditional role, right? In the sense that you would kind of broadcast from a particular place, or have a reportage or a documentary from so and so's place. Can you remind us of the places, for instance, that were broadcast live in Palestine? I remember listening to Radio Ma'azif just to kind of find out what was going on in a particular location.
We were broadcasting live from a cellular phone in Sheikh Jarrah during the time. We had a few friends who were living there, and we spoke to them. It was not always easy to find them and to get in touch with them because they were also going through all of that. But yes, definitely that. We also did some interviews that we replayed. But yeah, the live part, yeah, definitely. We spoke to people who were on the ground in Sheikh Jarrah, dealing with all of the troubles that they were going through, and I feel like the whole region was very concerned. I feel like we couldn't really continue doing anything normally when that was happening. So we wanted to give as much time as we can to raise awareness. Till now, we have a show, it's a small segment, it's #FreePalestine, where we still put some documentaries, some audio clips, just to keep that going, you know. It's still not over, and, you know.
Yeah, I mean, obviously when the urgency stops, like, exactly. You still kind of continue to,
Can I say something?
Yes, of course. I was actually going to.
No, but I wanted to say that one of the things that I thought was also really nice with Ma'azif is that it wasn't just reporting also, because, for example, I remember you invited Hamad al-Kurd to do a playlist, and I felt that was also really important. So it's not just that it's reports or like kind of this journalistic thing, but there was also these other these other instances or these other ways of engaging with people who are physically there than just kind of news reports, which I think was important.
Yeah, we reached out to Muhammad al-Kurd. We asked him if he can send us, music that has to do with something, you know, that music in his, and how can he communicate right now? And he gave us a beautiful playlist, and
I remember I listened to it, to the broadcast live.
It was so emotional. Yeah. I feel like that because he was he was in the center of it all.
Exactly. So for those of you who don't know who Muhammad al-Kurd is, he is a resident of Sheikh Jarrah and probably the most outspoken with his sister Mona. Two of the most outspoken people, and who were kind of like really kind of led the resistance movement to their eviction, basically. So, Badim, did you want to say something maybe about, you know, this the idea of, like, you know, shifting between refuge and protest or resistance in relation to the radios or Radio Al-Hara?
So the issue of protest is something that I feel very strongly about in general. And actually, because for example, Radio Al-Hara, before May last year, I think, I can't remember exactly what it was. There was it was when the...
Filmishmish.
Yes, Filmishmish, when the embassy was moving to Jerusalem, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
But it was also it was to protest the annexation.
Oh, the annexation, not the embassy.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
So it was a 3-day marathon. 3-day marathon of DJs and producers playing music continually for 72 hours.
Yeah.
In July of 2020.
And this was, there was an interesting discussion with friends and actually also with, Yusuf, Ulyas, Yazan, like the people from Radio Al-Hara about like, what does this do, right? Like when you have this protest online, what does it necessarily do? And there was actually a lot of kind of controversy almost about it. Like, is this the thing to do in a thing like this, or should we be doing something else? And I think, and I have, I said this is something that I feel strongly about because I have, sorry for those who have heard me speak about this before, I no longer think that we protest in a way that is proportionate or adequate to our current conditions. And I think that the space of the radio, and I don't know if that was the right thing or not. If for me it was right because it brought people together to have a discussion, whether it's mirroring the radio, whether it's inviting in July 2020 when they invited everyone, or now in May when Radio Al-Hara was mirroring with other radio programs who were, what you were talking about now, who were contributing or kind of like showing solidarity, or what Ma'azif did. I think that this is something that is important to discuss, this kind of sites of protest and what that might mean. But for me, at least, the important thing is that it kept people coming together over. We don't agree on anything. If you think about it, people don't necessarily agree on any, and it always comes out somehow. But at least for that moment, and it kind of was a stepping stone to build some form of community that has also shared, not just interests, but shared kind of. Goals. Free Palestine should be everyone's goal, but it's like goals that are, we're in this, I guess, solidarity. I hesitate when I use this word, but I guess solidarity. So, yeah, but this is something that I think is important. This is a whole other discussion maybe of, how do we protest or using digital spaces or something. But I just wanted to say that I think it's quite important that. Yeah, this bringing people together, this constant conversation, seeing what different things come out, whether in playlist or news, I think it's quite important.
I think by virtue of the mere existence, I think, of these web radios and the fact that they were able also to continue despite because everyone is a volunteer, right? So it's not, this is not a profit-making venture, and also in the sense that, I think by virtue of them being on the web, also allows these radios to say whatever they want because they bypass or circumvent the kind of traditional. Censorship or the censorship that usually impacts or affects traditional media, and specifically also radio, right, on what can and cannot be broadcast. So I think that I definitely agree with you in the sense that I think one should really kind of hash out what exactly are the terms of protest, or how do we actually protest in the face of such violence and in the face of such also urgency. But I think that perhaps we can look at it differently from like the efficacy of protest, but also what it is able to yield in the future, right? So if we have these spaces that can hold us together or bring us together for specific purposes or specific causes, or get us behind specific causes or others, right? Because this will also, this will also kind of lead us to talk about the audience, right? I mean, who is the audience of these two radios? And I think that both of them have such a wide reach that it is able to actually make an impact in that sense. The form, however, can also be discussed and debated, right? I mean, what does it actually do to play music in solidarity? But this has been such an age-old way of expressing solidarity, and not only that, but it also is enduring. It's very enduring, and I think that both of the radios were really able to kind of create the spaces for these things to happen. And it was also, you know, because it wasn't merely musical in that sense, right? So there was the broadcast live from the locations in Palestine or from Beirut. But it was also the documentaries, the speeches. This also happened during the Black Lives Matter movement in that same year, right, where the radio became a space for endless, you know, broadcasts of speeches, interviews, etc.
Even playlists. Like a lot of people send us some playlists, but they were very themed, you know, they were themed for the time, if it was sad or not, or I don't know, something that can make you, I don't know, feel better at the time. So music is also a way of using a space to protest, I guess.
Yeah.
But maybe I say also something about what you just said in terms of like building, like kind of this idea of continuing to build a community, or for people to stay together, and around the sustainability of this, because I mean, you were saying that earlier that there were, I mean, I don't know if actually Ma'azif also had these concerns of like once the pandemic subsides or whatever, yani, once some form of normalcy came back to life, like will people abandon them? And I actually don't know by numbers, it would be interesting to know, but for me there was, and then this, as sites of protest, yes, of course there's something interesting, but for me really, it's, the radio is like, I'm really, really interested in them because they also provide, because of their regular programming, they provide a space that is beyond simply like an existence always to counter. So, you know, it's not that Ma'azif or Radio Al-Hara were created to like basically fight the system, right? I mean, you know, maybe in the grander scheme, yani, in the grander idea of it, but it really kind of also builds, like it builds, it has a kind of a productive or generative building ability rather than just constantly being in against something. So
or
like
reactive.
reactive, yeah. Yes, thank you for giving me the word. Yes, so like not being always reactive, but also a space that actually like helps things grow, whether it's like, at least through my show, whether it's like artists who wanted to talk about ongoing projects and they just wanted to share this with people to see what they might get back, or because they needed to hear it on the radio sometimes, I mean, you know, with some artists, or if it's in kind of, you know, yeah, or if even if it's like kind of in this protest. But I'm just saying that it's not just kind of an existence to counter or reactionary.
For Radio Ma'azif, I mean, yeah, the big another big side of the radio for us is the archiving aspect. I mean, this is a huge side that is very time consuming. I mean, you know, to put up, but it's not just, you know, listening live. It's also listening to archive shows, and the residents you can follow a resident and listen to every one of his show if you're interested in. For example, we have a beautiful show about the Iraqi maqam, and you can follow and get to know, for example, that genre and that specific our music, you know. So yeah, in terms of building, you were saying, yeah, the radio has a different role as well. It's not just live; it's also the library, and I mean that's a big part of why I've always been interested in radio. Is because if you're into music and you want to discover things, like you said earlier, the artist is the one who is producing this. So if an artist is actually knowledgeable about, let's say, Indian music, and he has a show on the radio, he's going to curate for you the best things according to him or to her. And it's a big place for discovery of talent and of music. You're listening to what someone wants to put out right now. In terms, the difference between traditional radio, it's much more, I feel like, organized. There's the news section. There is different programs. There is the, I don't know, the whole organization of that radio. That's different.
Can I rephrase your question? But maybe this is not what you meant. Were you asking if this is essentially an easy accessible bubble? No.
I may have the answer. No, I think it's really about like accidents, right? Like, yani, no one can ever kind of like accidentally tune into Radio Al-Hara in a given geographical location, or Ma'azif for that matter, right? So it's precisely about intention. It's precisely about, okay, I'm going to listen to this web radio because I know a show is coming on, and I know the schedule for today's program. So this question of access maybe is perhaps linked to this, yani, in the sense that, you know, people who aren't particularly tuned into the, yani, don't necessarily have access to the web or to the internet. Like, what, you know, there's like a frame of access, right?
Yeah, but I'm really just talking about difference. There's no kind of...
Yeah. Okay, it's like underlying.
It's really like, I mean, the question can apply to the issue of archiving as well. You know, the difference...
It's okay. It's true. Traditional... Yeah, you can't really archive on traditional FMs.
But I mean,
you'll have to wait for the rerun, for example. You know.
I'm guessing there's kind of potentialities and lacks in each of these mediums. They're different things. So my question is really about the materiality and whether it's useful to think about them. And in terms of archiving, also, I think there are kind of real differences between archiving something that's hosted somewhere versus archiving something that you have on your hard drive versus... I personally, I guess if I were to not phrase it as a question, I personally would be interested in getting at the kind of, just being precise about the differences of these materialities or lack thereof, and what the potentialities and lack thereof of each of these formats are. What I feel, and this is maybe a judgment, what I feel is happens with this use of the term is that it sort of glazes over and just says like, this is a punctual audio meeting, and the medium sort of gets, you know, it's not so important and it's not so taken apart. But it's a technical thing that
But look, I think there is something, you know, like even within this the framework of this talk. I mean, I know that we're speaking about radios, but I think at the heart of it is that we're speaking about digital spaces in general, and what they, I mean, whether the kind of the medium is. I mean, I know that radio kind of does specific things that maybe make it more accessible.
Perhaps also a redefinition of what radio is in that sense, like a redefinition in the sense that it also redefines what a host is, what collective listening is, what acousmatic listening is, means, right? I mean, for you not to be looking at the person who is speaking, etc., but also the role of social media in it, I think is really, really important. I think because, whether we like it or not, or whether I like it or not, and there are visuals that are churned every day to kind of talk about a particular person that's coming on, etc. I absolutely understand, not just understand, but I'm going there with you in the sense that I think it's important to think about these things. But what I find interesting is how every one of these radios has basically given its own interpretation of what they think radio is. You know, for instance, I'll just give an example that I think is really very different from what's going on with Radio Ma'azif, Radio Al-Hay, and Radio Al-Hara, is Radio Karantina, which is an exclusively Instagram-based radio, right? And it's like still called, you know, they obviously were commissioning sets of music, etc., and other things at the beginning of the pandemic, but it kind of like took its own path, right? So yeah, in that respect, I'm just really kind of interested in what these definitions mean, yeah, for the term itself.
Sorry, maybe I'll just say one more thing, because I think that, I mean, it's a very good question, because I think, you know, we're speaking of intention, right? But the intention, if you think about archiving, when you're kind of like embarking on this digital spaces project, I think the intention is completely different to how you also archive, to what you want to do with it, to how long it lives, to all these categorizations, but also things like, I mean, when you're talking also about social media, you also have certain restrictions that come in the form, I gave the example of the Ma'azif post being taken down. I mean, I don't think that happened with either one of the radios, but this is something that happens to digital spaces. So like the whole, I think, my sense is that the whole way of, the way you approach the whole project is just kind of a different, it's with different intentions and different tools altogether. But I think with the word, I mean, yeah, it's like the word meeting in a sense, right?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, or like there's multiple, anyway.
But yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think I understand what you're trying to get at, but also I think also what having looked at the kind of like very how should I say this? Literature on radio in the region is like so insufficient. At least I've found, and the only couple of books or the only writings that I found on traditional radio, both in Palestine and Lebanon specifically, have really mostly talked about state radio, right? And we don't have. Maybe with the exception of Palestine, it's in certain cases, in certain events, there is no experience of pirate radio, for instance. Although it is said that, you know, having you know, setting up a radio frequency is actually quite easy. But yeah, I think, you know, there needs to be perhaps a kind of a look at how also we've regarded radio, like how we've regarded radio as an institution, as a state-sponsored media, etc.
Yeah, just to add one thing on that as well, like traditional radio, when you're actually, for example, when there's a news program or any kind of program, you know that it's going to be targeting Beirut, for example, and you know that these are for the listeners of this city. Not even يمكن the north of Lebanon, it might not reach there, so it might be just really that space. But once the contributor of an online radio, you know that you don't know who you're talking to. You don't know who is going to understand, so you might as well just do what you want. You know, I mean, it's really open to whoever gets it, and it's really open for anyone. So it's a very different also type of... the contributors have a different mindset to what they're going to put out there. It's really for whoever gets it, because it's really for everyone. Whereas traditional radio, there is the news that's for the city right now, so they need to be following, for example, now there is traffic, or now there is, it's 6 o'clock, so it's time for news, you know, it needs to be following the day of the city.
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm not saying like you guys are ruining radio.
I completely understand.
Like
yeah,
what you were saying, Raya, about like, you know, the different definitions or the different ways and the proliferation of that. I just think I would be interested.
No, I definitely think it's a very interesting, opening, right, about like the material conditions of these radios or platforms, for sure.
I'm going to ask another question, but I'll try to be more articulate this time. So I think what's super exciting about these two radios is, in a sense, yeah, okay. In a sense that as someone studying the 60s, 70s in the region, there seems to be a resurgence of the kind of cross-disciplinary, politicized engagement that comes through with these radios. You know, so when we speak of solidarity, but also, you know, just the kind of things that it makes possible, like, you know, and also just reading or rediscovering this history, as so many historians have done, they have a tendency to also like split these things up, like, you know the visual art and the artists, and you don't realize that these were collaborating with people in theater, with people, you know, in music. The question I have is, you know, that this resurgence seems to be, I guess if I can put it, like a kind of return of the repressed, you know, which is not like necessarily, you know, it's always used like in a negative way, but there's something potentially really exciting about this resurgence, right, in a kind of, yeah, politicized, space for solidarity. I guess the question is, and it's a really broad and open question, but if we were to, I guess, sidestep the question of intention, and to think, you know, the question that Lenin asked, what is to be done? What is to be done politically if we were to think, and I guess this is what I tried very inarticulately to touch upon earlier, is how do we kind of touch upon something beyond an imagined space that is a space of belonging, right? Because, of course, it's amazing to somehow bring in so many people who belong and who identify with these radios, you know, as so many people do. The question is, like, is there, let's say, a horizon beyond that, you know, because whenever you're talking about belonging, you're also talking about in circles and people who don't belong. So, like, what is, yeah, the political horizon, let's say, if there is one, beyond, yeah. Sorry for this super long.
We're in Lebanon and Palestine. Definitely, there's always political horizon.
The radios are the fact that these two radios, I think, submerged during these times is a statement in itself, I feel.
I think, I mean, I don't know, sorry, I don't know if I understood the full question, but maybe just something that comes to mind is that I mean, yeah, I think that, I mean, there's always a political underpinning to everything that I think people, I mean, not everything, but most of the things that, you know, most of us do in the region. And I think that you know, the question of kind of like having like this is what you're asking, right? Like having a political.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I agree. It's inherently political. The projects themselves are political. I think the question is what is not intentionally on the like level of, you know, you as founders, as collaborators of your intentional direction, but like what is like what, I don't know, I guess it's a broad question, but like, you know, what do we mean when we're looking at these, like, what is the value of thinking about these cross-disciplinary practices of solidarity in the sphere of arts? Like, what can we do with this? What can we do with this today, looking back also on this, like, you know, forgotten part of our history that seems also to be recurring? What can we do with it?
I think that...
Well, I mean, I think, Natasha, I think you touched on something that's quite important. I'm not sure if you were referring to Fanon when you talked about the oppressed. So I think I know where you're getting at. I think on a very surface level, I think prioritizing the voice is already something in activating this kind of political horizon. I'm sure because these platforms are still nascent in that sense, I think that whatever political imagination is going to kind of either pull them apart or bring them together is really I think your question is incredibly important, but I'm not entirely sure that I think that perhaps it's information, but at least on the surface level, and because you brought up the term the oppressed and how it relates to Frantz Fanon and his own writing on the voice of Algeria and how important radio was in Algeria for the liberation fronts there, right? I think, yeah, I think. I mean, I won't lie and say I'm not thinking about these things, but I'm not sure I have an answer yet in that respect.
Maybe I just say, I mean, I don't know if this would answer it, but maybe I go back to something that I said in the beginning, is that I really, to just emphasize it, is I think that the fact that you have, at least speaking Radio Al-Hara from Palestine, like the fact that you had Palestinians who normally might have never circulated in visual arts, for example, but might be kind of working on the periphery of culture, who were coming together, who were contributing to the radio, who were meeting people in Palestine or in Lebanon or in, like, I think that was a huge, that was a huge, at least, and I think that's enough, but at least like a feel good of like what, I'm connected to people, I'm part of something. And I know that this is what you were saying, that beyond this kind of like imagined.
Yeah, but I think it's also emancipatory.
Exactly.
Yes, because it builds, because again, it's like, there are projects that again build, that have at the core of them this kind of like building something rather than just kind of like either destroying or just simply nostalgic or something. So I think that there's the political is definitely in also this kind of like ability to bring people together, especially at a time when like we're super fragmented. Sorry, I forgot. I had a good point.
Later. But I think you said it, Raya. It's really about for activating the voice, and activating the listenership, and activating the conversation that can happen through that. So if there's a space with a sense of solidarity and there's contributors saying things, it is really putting a voice to these people. They can say and present their ideas. Yeah.
I remembered, sorry. It's not a very good point, but I remember I was thinking of the interdisciplinary aspect of it, and I think generally the visual arts are bored of themselves, so they've been reaching out to everyone. But the radio has been also great because, at least for me in my show, I've interviewed artists. I've interviewed really musicians who technically the show should not cover, but I also had this kind of interest. Okay, these are people who work with, they're artists. They work with sound. They work with sound in a completely different way than what I've been doing for the past 15 years. But for me, that like the radio almost, and this show almost allowed me to kind of go further into this interdisciplinary kind of, or even with the Ma'azif show, like, I mean, I'm going to be interviewing scientists, for example. I don't know what I'm going to ask them, but this. So it's also like, at least for me personally, it's allowing me that space to do it. But I think it generally does that because you also have people who who actually have day jobs, and they're not necessarily only artists. So like this, it allowed a lot of people who have always wanted to do something. To kind of do it and to keep doing it if they're good, but if they're not good.
Yeah.
To continue? I think we're out of time, unless someone has a very short question, or perhaps we can talk outside. Thank you very much for coming. I hope we didn't bring your ears out. Thank you very much.